It's a 6-hour trip between North Sydney and Port aux Basques in Newfoundland. We hear the evening and subsequent sailings are cancelled. Hurricane Florence is tracking north after causing havoc in the US states of Florida and the Carolinas, and the crossing will be too rough for the ferry. Our accommodation is pre-booked, but there's a scramble for any available rooms in town for those who are planning to return to North Sydney tonight. It's a grey, wet and windy day as we head north for Gromorn National Park, an outlying range of the Appalachians and the eroded remains of ancient mountains. Rocky Harbour's the main community and our base for 2 nights at Augustus Jane, a recently opened very pleasant B&B. It's still very windy from the tail end of Hurricane Florence, but our host tells us of not infrequent 200 km/h winds here. A number of shops here have double entrance doors with an airlock between, and it's a struggle to open the outer door against the wind. Gromorn National Park features a number of deep fjords and a tableland area with mountain hiking trails. Gromorn Mountain, after which it's named, is 807 metres high, Newfoundland's second highest peak. This is the Viking Trail, extending between the coast and the Long Range Mountains, 526 kilometres from the Trans-Canada Highway turn-off at Deer Lake to Lansell Meadows. The Arches Provincial Park north of Gromorn features these limestone rock formations eroded by glacial and sea wave action. There's a lot of empty country between these little fishing communities. It's late September and we notice many stockpiles of wood ready for winter. There's an archaeological site at Phillips Garden in the Port-au-Choix National Park where a dwelling site of Paleo-Eskimo people has been found. The nearest accommodation we can find to Lansell Meadows is at Raleigh. Raleigh was originally called Ha Ha Bay after the bay on which it's located. Burnt Cape protects the harbour against harsh winters, which can leave 12-metre snowbanks. The harbour can freeze and often's filled with ice. Although the weather's beautiful at the moment, it was only 1 degree Celsius this morning, rising to just 8. Fisheries have collapsed here and most younger people have moved away. The few remaining children all go to school in St Anthony. Often houses are just boarded up and abandoned when an older person dies. The town's only cafe is closed for the season, so we drive the 60-kilometre round trip to St Lunaire for dinner. Biscuits and coffee in our room cover breakfast. We are here at the far-flung northern tip of Newfoundland to visit Lansell Meadows, the remains of an 11th century Viking settlement, the earliest evidence of Europeans in North America. The remnants of the settlement, discovered in 1960, correspond with stories in the Vinland sagas documenting the voyages of Leif Erikson and other Norse explorers. We've seen Leif's statue in Reykjavik in Iceland, and with Norse ancestry, I'm interested to learn more. This village is a faithful reconstruction of buildings from the nearby archaeological site, but we're disappointed to find the area closed down early for the winter. But at least we have the place to ourselves. St Anthony is a main service centre for northern Newfoundland and southern Labrador. French and Basque fishermen used its sheltered harbour as a seasonal fishing station in the early 16th century, and other settlers began arriving by the mid-19th century. A salt fish plant and cold storage facility were built in the 1930s and 40s, but as fishing stocks dwindled, tourism has become important. Dr. Wilfred Grenfell, a British medical doctor and missionary, arrived in the Labrador area in 1892, the first doctor to reach the region. He established a string of hospitals, cooperatives and schools for people in these remote areas with the founding of the Grenfell Mission at Red Bay in 1900. It was later based here in St Anthony. The mission was responsible for the health care of more than 30,000 people until 1981, when the Canadian government took over for $1. Dr. Grenfell died in 1940. Goose Cove is a small fishing community near St Anthony, originally known as Petit Oie, meaning little goose. Between 1884 and 1911, its economy relied on the land-based seal hunt and the cod and salmon fisheries. Sir Wilfred Grenfell had a cooperative store established here in Great Briar in the early 1900s. The community was once a French fishing station and is thought to have been named after an island off the coast of Brittany. St Carol's, also once known as French Bay and St Charles, is closest to the northern fishing grounds and was once a minor French fishing station. Until 1970 it could only be reached by boat. Ship's Cove is another tiny community at what feels like the end of the earth, right at the northern tip of Newfoundland. I think its only claim to fame is this miniature village built on a rock and the seasonal drifting of icebergs and pack ice. Ferries cross the Gulf of St Lawrence from St Barbe to Blanc-Sablon in Labrador. The weather as we head south is far from pleasant. The area around Parsons Pond was charted by Captain James Cook in 1768. It's a fishing village just north of Gromorn National Park, and in 1867 an attempt was made to tap oil found in the shale deposits here. We overnight in Deer Lake, the interchange point between the Viking Trail and the Trans-Canada Highway to the east. Gander Airport opened in 1936 as an important refuelling stop for transatlantic aircraft. During World War II, it became a strategic post for fighters and bombers en route to Europe, but following the 9/11 terror attacks of 2001 in New York and Washington, 38 incoming aircraft were forced to land here. The town took in nearly 6,700 people, almost doubling its population, and cared for them over the next 5 days, rallying together to provide food and accommodation until flights could resume. We turn off the Trans-Canada Highway, heading for Sandringham on the Eastport Peninsula and our B&B, the delightful Prince of Wales Inn. This polar bear skin was given to our hosts by a local Inuit leader during their time in Nain in the far north of Labrador. As it's almost the end of the season and many of the eateries have closed, our hosts recommend we dine at the Inn at Happy Adventure, a small outport village of about 200 residents located around 3 lovely inlets. Traditionally painted with a red ochre paint, these fishing stages are typical of buildings associated with the cod fishing here in Newfoundland. Built at the water's edge, they contain working tables and sheds where fish are landed and processed for salting and drying. St John's, at the tip of the Avalon Peninsula, is the capital of Newfoundland and Labrador Province. At the eastern terminus of the Trans-Canada Highway, one of the longest national highways in the world, it's one of the oldest cities in North America. The collapse of the cod fishery in the 1990s seriously affected the economy, but the proximity to offshore oil fields has led to an economic boom. Steep residential streets with brightly coloured homes are reminiscent of San Francisco. The weather has been deteriorating again as we travel east. St John's is known as the foggiest, windiest and cloudiest of Canada's cities, with the wettest months from October to January. It's the end of September now. We have one day here and the weather is hampering our sightseeing. Fall's a bit late this year, but now the long-awaited autumn colour is appearing. Cox's Cove is on a large inlet off the Bay of Islands to the west of Corner Brook. Its herring fishery and processing plant is the community's major employer, and the fish plant also supplies feed to a local mink farm. Corner Brook, just south of Growmore National Park and the most northerly city in Atlantic Canada, is our next stopover. The area was surveyed by Captain James Cook in 1767. A pulp and paper mill is a major employer in the region. On the southern side of the Bay of Islands, the fishing communities of York Harbour and Lark Harbour are separated by the promontory of the Blow Me Down Provincial Park. The harbours and communities here are named after HMS York and HMS Lark, used by Captain Cook whilst surveying and charting the area between 1764 and 1767. We head back towards Chanel Port Basque with fingers crossed there are no more weather interruptions to the ferry crossing back to North Sydney in Nova Scotia. Chanel Porta Basque, at the extreme southwesterly tip of Newfoundland, is the primary entry to the island and the location of the Marine Atlantic ferry terminal. Porta Basque is the oldest in a collection of towns making up this settlement, amalgamated in the 1970s, which also consists of Chanel, Grand Bay and Mouse Island. Chanel was first settled in the early 1700s by fishermen from the Channel Islands, and Porta Basque was the harbour used by whalers from the Basque area of France and Spain during the early 16th century. Porta Basque dates back to 1687. A permanent settlement of French fishermen here on the French shore was set up after France ceded its claims in Newfoundland to Great Britain in exchange for the right to use coastal lands for their fisheries. These are the largest ice-breaking ferries in the world, taking 1,200 passengers and 350 cars, as well as many semi-trailers.